Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Welcome to this thing that I do called Thor's Entertainment. I am Thor, and today I'm continuing my playthrough of Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. This is going to be part 4 of my playthrough, and in this episode I am going after the second to last boss of the game. And before I really get going, I'll go ahead and do a really quick recap of the main events of the game so far. Now, in the beginning we found out that almost all of mankind was conquered by a vampire empire that was being run by Kain, the main antagonist of the game. Kain had 6 vampire lieutenants that were helping him run his empire. Each one of them had their own clans and territories, and that includes our main character, Raziel. Now, unfortunately for Raziel, he was brutally murdered by his leader Kain at the very beginning of the game, and his fellow lieutenants, people that Raziel considered his brothers, well, they just kind of stood by and let it happen. Centuries after his death, Raziel was resurrected and changed from a blood-sucking vampire into a wraith-like creature that can devour souls. And since his resurrection, Raziel has been using this new form to go on a revenge path against his brothers and his master. So far, he has managed to kill off 3 of his former fellow lieutenants. That includes crushing Melchiah to death, catching Zephon on fire, and exposing Rahab to light to the point where he burst into flames. The next one for Raziel to get revenge against is going to be his brother Dumah. So let's go ahead and get started. And okay, before we become too invested in going after Dumah, let's go ahead and see what Ariel and the Elder God have to say, starting with Ariel.
Beyond the cliffs that witnessed your execution, a silent city sits in frozen tableau. Locked in eternal limbo, they await redemption or release.
And alright, those were the hints and clues that Ariel had to give us. Let's go ahead and see what the Elder God has to say next. We're going back to the underworld.
Centuries past, your brother Dumah retreated with his clan into Nosgoth's northern wilderness. Empowered by the gift of Rahab's soul, seek out his mountain stronghold, but tread carefully. These frozen wastes have mysteries yet to disclose.
And okay, that is going to be all the additional information that Raziel can get from Ariel and the Elder God. So now it is time to get back on track and go after our next target, which, as they alluded to, is going to be Dumah. That is going to be the 4th of 5 different lieutenants that Raziel considered brothers. And because of the way this game is structured, even though there is one more brother for Raziel to kill after Dumah, that is actually going to be the very last one that we go after. The 5th and final brother, Ariel, actually ends up not making an appearance in this game. He was originally intended to be in the game, but unfortunately he was cut. In fact, there were a bunch of ideas, locations, enemies, all of which did not make it into the final game of Soul Reaver. Ariel is just one of many of those, and that is one of the interesting things about this remaster. There is a bunch of additional content, especially for this first Soul Reaver game, and some of the most interesting stuff the bonus content makes available to the player are those missing locations or enemies. Some of those were brought back in this game, and you can go to those levels and interact with them a little bit. They are not complete enough for you to actually see everything that would have taken place had the game not been cut down so much, but you still get to explore it a little bit. And that also includes getting to see what Ariel would have looked like and the stage where you would have fought him. As cool as it was to see that though, Ariel would not end up making an appearance in this game, but he would eventually return in the very last game of the series, Legacy of Kain Defiance, where finally, after Raziel was playable in 3 different games, he finally gets revenge against the very last brother. But I think I have said enough about what could have been and what will eventually be in future games. Let's go ahead and focus on the objective at hand, going after Dumah. And in order for Raziel to reach Dumah's territory, he had to cross all the way to the opposite side of the Lake of the Dead and hop into the water. On that opposite side, there are 2 different cliffs that Raziel can reach. I've already shown that one of those leads to the human citadel, but the other one leads to Dumah's territory, which is going to be this snowy region right here, and these are the walls to his fortress. As far as I can tell, there is no way to glide to that cliff. You have to be able to swim. And once you have that ability, you can have Raziel swim right beneath that cliffside, and then you can have him do a Polaris breach like he's a great white shark, and then you can reach that cliffside. You climb up there and you take a long walk through a cave path, and you eventually reach the snowy area where you find the walls of the fortress that's going to be Dumah's territory. Now, I do not cross those walls into Dumah's territory immediately. Instead, I decided to go ahead and explore the surrounding area. There's not really too much you can do here right now, but there are a bunch of his clan's vampires just kind of roaming around. And if you were to travel far enough down the path, you will eventually reach another fortress-like area, where there seems to be some kind of a sundial in the middle of this plain. There is nothing you can do with this at the moment, but you will eventually return to that point, because that is going to be the secret of accessing the very last area of the game. But that is an area we cannot open up just yet. We first have to go back and fight Dumah. Speaking of which, I am having Raziel backtrack all the way to the entry point of his territory, which is going to be directly across from the warp gate. That's going to be the closest point that we can teleport to if we, for some reason, need to come back here later. Which we are definitely going to have to do because we just showed an area that's going to be the final part of the game. And that warp gate room is going to be the closest location that we can fast travel to for both of those areas. So it can see plenty of use, especially if you do not go directly from Dumah's territory to that final part of the game. And okay, this was the very last vampire standing between us and that warp gate room. We go ahead and use the fire reaver to set it on fire, so I am going to be going uncontested to that warp gate room to get it activated, and then we can start actually getting back on track and really focusing on all the criteria for getting to face off against Dumah. Which, besides the silenced cathedral that belonged to Zephon's territory, I would say that Dumah's territory, its fortress and city, are going to be the second largest or the third largest part of the game. I am very positive that Zephon's territory is the largest, and I would say the final part of the game is the second largest, and that would make Dumah's the third, although I might be wrong about that. It might be the second largest, but it's pretty close, I think. Anyway, in order to get over the massive walls that separate you from Dumah's territory, Raziel needs to climb to the very top of one of these little columns or pillars, and once he is at the very top, he's able to jump off and glide over the walls into the fortress territory.
This city once teemed with the life of my kind. Could it be that other clans had suffered the same fate as mine? In his madness, could Kain spare none of his brood?
It was not Kain, but Dumah's own arrogance that brought the downfall of his clan. These are human weapons, Raziel. Believing themselves invincible, Dumah and his offspring failed to see an attack coming from the least likely assailants. Complacent in their arrogance, they were taken by surprise, allowing the human vampire hunters to decimate their ranks with little resistance. The few that escaped have been reduced to scavengers.
And that provides something of an explanation for why Dumah's clan has been the most common vampire all across Nosgoth. Because the human vampire hunters managed to infiltrate and decimate their ranks, they were all forced to flee from their own fortress. And since then, they have been just trying to survive wherever they can. So they are pretty widespread and pretty common, so Raziel has been killing them pretty much everywhere. But now that we are within Dumah's fortress, I have Raziel go into the spectral realm, pass through the gates, and I'll go ahead and show this area over here, which is going to be where we need to lower a drawbridge, that way we can access Dumah's throne room. That is going to be one of a few different puzzles that we need to solve in order to reach Dumah and ultimately defeat him. There isn't going to be much we can do here at the moment, but I do want to show you where we ultimately want to end up. So I have Raziel jump down to the bottom of where that drawbridge is eventually going to be lowered, and I have him pass through the gate courtesy of Melchiah's gift since we are still in the spectral realm. We pass through the gate and we find a wraith which Raziel is able to kill with just a few different telekinesis blasts. And after we defeat the wraith, we have Raziel press on to what's going to be a little square. And in that square is going to be a spire as well as a gate that we cannot get through, and beyond that gate is going to be Dumah's throne room. In order to initiate the fight with Dumah, we have to enter the throne room. But that is only going to be one part of the puzzle, because the other major puzzle we have to figure out is how exactly to defeat Dumah. And that is going to be something that I set up in advance. And okay, here is the courtyard, which has a statue of Dumah. Later on, you can access a few optional areas from this courtyard, which also includes an optional item or two. I am not going to be showing that in this video since I am kind of trying to stick to the main story elements, but I still wanted to show it in case you ever wanted to come here yourself and try to get those optional items or just check out some optional areas. Although if that is something that you want to explore, I do recommend waiting until you have defeated Dumah, because you are going to need the ability that you get by defeating him in order to access those optional rooms as well as the optional item. Even after Raziel is able to get back into the material world, if you do not have that ability, it's kind of pointless to go back to the courtyard. Anyway, I think I have done enough showing where we eventually need to end up, as well as showing an optional area and things of that nature. I should probably go ahead and focus on what we actually need to do in order to get through the puzzles and get through this entire territory. First thing you really need to focus on is getting Raziel back into the material world, which is not something you have to wander around too much to do. Going back to how I got Raziel in this area to begin with, I had him glide over the wall and then go through a double door. Once he was through that double door, we had a cutscene. I had Raziel go into the spectral realm, and then he passed through a couple of gates. And beyond those two gates was this completely gated off central portion of a large room. On the opposite side of that sealed off area is going to be a rift that we can use to get back into the material world. I had Raziel do that, and then beyond the gates in the middle of the room is going to be a squared block that we can push using telekinesis. I push it as much as I possibly can to the cell on the opposite side of the room. Once it is completely up against the wall, I have Raziel go back into the spectral realm, pass through the gates, and then hop on that block and use it as a way of accessing a higher up level of this area. Once up there, Raziel is going to find a rift that he can use to get back into the material world, and once he is back in the material world, I have him hop back down into a centralized area. That centralized area that I'm talking about is between the gates that separated him from the courtyard where he had that cutscene whenever he first entered this territory. Once in that hallway, I have him go to the end of it where we can see some light gleaming into that area, and there's also going to be a block that you can pull out of the wall. I have Raziel go ahead and pull that block out just a little bit, just enough to where he can jump onto it, and then from there, using that additional height, jump up to a higher area that allows him to oversee the courtyard. From there, Raziel can crawl all the way to the ledge and then glide across the courtyard where that cutscene happened earlier. Once on the other side, he can follow that hallway to an area that we need to be in next, which is going to be an area with some large pools of water. I go ahead and I have Raziel pull the lever in order to drain the water from those pools. And once the water is gone, the dead vampires that were inside of those pools come back to life because they are no longer exposed to the substance that previously killed them. That is going to give us some adversaries that we can face off against, but there's also going to be some elements to a puzzle inside both of these pools. Now, it does not matter which pool you decide to start off in, but I personally choose to go ahead and start inside the pool furthest away from the hallway that got us into this area to begin with. Within the opposite pool, there are going to be two different blocks. I go ahead and move one immediately to the wall that's attached to the median area that separates the two pools. Once that block is pushed all the way up against the wall, I then go to the second one and start dragging it to the first block. That way I can stack the two of them on top of each other. That's not going to be high enough for us to do anything with at the moment, but whenever they are stacked up on top of each other, that is all I need to do right now in this opposite pool. I then need to have Raziel move over to the first pool that is the closest to the hallway that gave us access to this area. And okay, I have that block stacked on top of the other one, so Raziel is free to go ahead and move over to the other pool. And inside of the other pool, there are going to be 4 blocks this time. 3 of them are going to be movable and 1 of them is going to be stationary. So I start moving the 3 movable blocks to the stationary one. And the objective here is going to be to use the stationary block as a means of getting the movable blocks flipped onto the median. We want 2 of the movable blocks moved onto the median, that way we can adjust them and use them in combination with the other blocks we've already stacked on top of each other in the other pool. Once we have 2 blocks on the median, what we want to do is push 1 of them on top of the stack of 2 that we already have in the other pool. That's going to give us a stack of 3 that we can move all the way against the wall on the furthest side of the opposite pool. The wall on that furthest side is going to be just below a hallway that we have not accessed yet, that's going to give us access to the incinerator or the furnace. But once we have a stack of 3 blocks, we're going to find that Raziel cannot jump that high. Although if he were on top of that stack of 3 blocks, he would be able to access the new hallway. That is where the 4th and final block is going to come into place, because I said we are flipping 2 blocks onto the median, so 1 is still there. Raziel needs to move that 1 remaining block into the opposite pool with that stack of 3 by itself. And he needs to move it all the way against that stack of 3 blocks, because whenever he is standing on that single block, at that point he's able to jump onto the stack of 3. And once he is on the stack of 3, he's able to jump up to the new hallway that's going to take us to that furnace or that incinerator, whatever you want to call it. And that furnace is going to be a key component in accessing the rest of Dumah's territory, as well as a key component of how we are going to defeat Dumah later. And alright, here we see the plan coming together. Raziel is moving the stack of 3 blocks into position. You see me test jump just to make sure he cannot jump onto the stack of 3 by himself without the additional block. He cannot jump that high, so I go ahead and go back to the median after those 3 blocks are in place. And I start moving the single block all by itself over to the ledge, where I end up knocking it into the pool all by itself. And once that block is in the pool all by itself, I jump back into the pool and I start moving it close to the stack of 3. And finally, once it is close enough, I have Raziel jump onto the single block all by itself. That additional height gives Raziel just enough to where he can jump onto the stack of 3 and then jump up to the ledge and then move on to that hallway that I was talking about earlier. So let's go ahead and check out the incinerator room, where we're going to find one more vampire at a minimum. And then we can begin prepping a new weapon that's going to blow open a new pathway for us to explore this area, as well as prep it again so that we can truly use it as a weapon against the next boss. So yeah, here is the incinerator room. I'm navigating around on the pipes, kind of just looking for the vampire that I need to take down. Eventually I do end up finding the Dumah clan vampire on the ground for the incinerator room. I ignore him for a moment just to go ahead and glide over to the area where there's going to be a wheel that Raziel can turn, and whenever he turns that wheel, it is going to unleash some gas in the area that's going to be very flammable and useful here in just a moment. After setting off the gas, I kill the vampire, and then I go over to a lever, and with that gas activated, pulling that lever then ignites the gas, giving us a huge explosion of fire. And with that explosion of fire comes a cutscene that blows open a hole in the wall and gives us a way of accessing a new part of Dumah's territory. And okay, with that explosion means there's now a hole in the wall that's going to give us a way of getting back to the sealed off room that we saw earlier, where I used my telekinesis to move around a block inside of the cell. Before I end up going back to that area though, I go back over to the wheel and I turn back on the gas. That is just prepping it for later to save me one extra step. And then I have Raziel travel down the hallway that's now accessible courtesy of the gas and the fire explosion causing a hole in the wall. That hallway leads all the way back to the sealed off room. And here is where I don't necessarily make a mistake, but I approach the next part of the puzzle in a not so efficient way. So first I'll explain what I am trying to do, and whenever I am successful at it, at that point I'll explain what I should have been doing. So my logic here was move the block inside the cell one more time. This time around, I want the block pressed all the way against the wall on the opposite side of the cell that is the closest to the rift that he used to get into the material realm earlier. You can see me doing that on screen right now, just over and over again, rapidly firing telekinetic blasts at the block until eventually it cannot move anymore. I just do that over and over and over again. It takes a moment, but eventually the block gets where I want it to go. Once over there, I try having Raziel shift into the spectral realm and then using that block as a way of reaching a platform above the cell. And once Raziel is on that platform, he can turn around and look at the interior of the cell. And to his right is going to be another platform that he seems to be able to jump and glide to and reach. Only whenever I attempt to do this in the spectral realm, I keep coming up just a little bit short. Even though it seems like the jump is possible, and yes, it definitely is possible. But since I was having trouble gliding and reaching it in the spectral realm, I have Raziel go ahead and hop down and go back into the physical world. Move the block one more time to the opposite side of the cell. And just like earlier, whenever you saw me just rapid firing the telekinetic blast at the block and seeing it take a while for it to reach the opposite side of the cell to where it was in a usable position, yeah, it's going to be the exact same scenario here. This takes me a while. But I do persevere and keep the blast going as long as necessary until that block is in the ideal position for me to use it as leverage to get to that platform one more time on the opposite side of the room. And then I use it as a way of getting back up to the platform we used earlier to get to the overlook of the courtyard. Only this time, whenever Raziel is back in the material world, we do not have him go back to the hallway to get to that overlook over the courtyard. We have him jump back inside the cell and start moving the block one more time. And once again, Raziel is trying to move that block against the wall closest to the rift he initially used to get back into the material world within this fortress. Now that Raziel is back in the material world, I have him hop back down into that cell and begin that process of moving that block back all the way to the opposite wall that I was just talking about. Dragging it manually seems to be much faster than whenever we were using our telekinesis to move it, so at least dragging the block is not being dragged out as much as it was before. Eventually though, that block is in place and we can begin these attempts one more time. As you can see, Raziel cannot just jump onto the block and then reach the desired platform that we want to get to. Instead, we are going to have to attempt jumping and gliding from that other platform once more. And now we have Raziel go back to that platform, this time in the material world, so we can attempt that jump one more time and see if he can reach the other platform. This does not work initially, but again, this is possible, and eventually, after enough attempts, I am successful. And once you are on that neighboring platform, Raziel is going to be able to find a movable block that he can then move and shove into the cell, and that is going to give us 2 movable blocks inside that cell. And now that I've explained what I was trying to do in order to reach that platform and access that block so I could shove it into the cell, let me show you the much better, much faster, much more reliable, and probably much more intended way of doing all this. From the platform where I shoved off that block, there's going to be a hallway, and if you follow that hallway all the way to its end, it turns out it leads to the incinerator room, to the handle that we pulled earlier to ignite the gas. So this entire time that I've been moving blocks and trying jumps that were really difficult and seemed to be borderline possible, borderline not possible, yeah, all I had to do was just walk down a hallway from the incinerator room. I made this so much harder than it needed to be. So yeah, I wouldn't full on call it a mistake because this is technically possible, but this is by far not the easiest way to do it, and there was a far simpler, far faster way of doing it. Just go down the hallway from the incinerator room to that block and make your life much easier. Whenever I was doing this playthrough, I completely forgot that there was a hallway right there, or believe me, I would have been doing that tactic instead. But whenever I was doing this playthrough, I completely forgot that that hallway was even there, so whenever it came time to access that block in order to stack them on top of each other in this little pit, and then use those in order to access the jumping puzzle for the drawbridge, yeah, I completely forgot about that hallway, or else I would have been using that as well. I was just kind of improvising to try and get to that block, and while what I ended up coming up with worked, it was definitely not the most ideal option, and it took a little while. If I am being completely transparent, I even considered quitting the game and then reloading it. That way I could do all these puzzles over again in a faster and more efficient fashion, so I could just cut out all these mistakes. But since my mistake ended up working, I kind of wanted to keep it in just to show that there are multiple ways of solving these puzzles, even if some of them are not intentional. Speaking of unintentional things, I definitely did not mean to send Raziel all the way to the bottom of that pit. And now I have to climb back out, head over to the cell again, and climb up those doubled up stacked blocks, and return up to those balconies. Speaking of those balconies, I never really explained what exactly I was trying to do there. The objective after you hop onto the stacked blocks and onto the platform above those is to go over to a section of that pit room where you can see those balconies, and you can start leapfrogging and jumping between those until you eventually reach the top. And on the topmost level, there is going to be a balcony that has a lever. That lever, if Raziel pulls it, lowers the drawbridge and will give him access to Dumah's throne room, or, well, not quite the throne room, but the square where we saw that obelisk earlier. So the immediate objective is to get to the very top of those balconies, and that was something I was struggling to do. I was very convinced I could make this jump between this lower balcony to the one just slightly above it, the one that has the rift that can take Raziel back into the material world. And if I make that jump, then across the room is another platform that has a lever that Raziel can pull to lower the drawbridge. So I tried over and over and over again to make this jump from the slightly lower platform to the upper one with the rift, but I could not make it. And eventually I realized there has to be a better way, so I started looking around at my surroundings. And it took me way too long to figure this out, but really what I should have been doing was trying to go over to the opposite side of the room to the platform with the lever that eventually needs to be pulled in the material world. There's a platform just below it, but the lever platform is slightly broken, so I can be on the lower platform, then jump through the hole, and then climb up onto that upper platform with the lever. And even though I cannot pull that lever in the spectral realm, being on that platform does give Raziel the height he needs to glide across the room to the rift to go back into the material world. And then he just needs to make that jump one more time back across the room to the lever so he can finally pull it. Unfortunately for me, though, I did not quite make that jump over to the rift because, well, I think my fingers slipped and I did not hit X a second time, which means no gliding, which means falling straight down the pit again. So I went ahead and I went all the way back to the cell to fully reset and then start the process over again. Not to worry though, that is going to be the very last time I accidentally fall into the pit of misery. This time around, I get Raziel to climb all the way back up those balconies. I now know exactly what I need to do. I go back to the lever platform, and from there I am able to jump and glide across the pit, get to the platform with the rift. I go back into the material world, I make the jump one more time back across the room, I pull the lever, the drawbridge is down, and now, finally, we can get just a little bit closer to facing off against Dumah. I do take just a moment to look down towards the drawbridge and assess the situation because I do not want to fall into the pit again. That'd be really, really unfortunate doing that 3 times. I end up eventually landing on the drawbridge and going all the way down the hallway where the very last puzzle that we need to solve really takes place. Well, I guess not the last one, the second to last one. Now, we saw earlier that the obelisk was in the middle of a gated area, and we saw that the gate to the throne room was closed and there really wasn't a way for us to open it. So I have Raziel go over here, I pull this block out of the wall, I drag it to the side, and I begin the next sequence of a climbing puzzle because there is a hidden platform above that Raziel can jump up to if he is standing on the block. And as the cinematic kind of alludes to here, by completing this puzzle, we should be able to get high enough and have a clear line of sight on the obelisk to where we can glide to it and fall within that fence line. What we want to do from there, once we are within that fence line, is knock over the obelisk so that it breaks the gate that is preventing us from accessing the throne room. So I have Raziel go over these pillars, pop on them, and he starts shifting between the physical and the spectral realm to adjust their height. I do demonstrate trying to glide to one of them in the material world does not work out, it's just a little bit too tall, so I don't think you can make that jump in the material world without first shifting into the spectral. And then after shifting from the spectral to the material again, it adjusts the heights one more time. Then once Raziel is in the material world, he can make it over to the 3rd pillar, and once standing on that, we shift back into the spectral realm, and then we can make the jump to the 4th, which has a rift that will take us back into the material realm one more time. And once we are back in the material realm, we can go over to the platform that allows us to glide within the fence line to the obelisk. And once we finally have access to the obelisk, we go ahead and we have Raziel destroy some property, knocking it over and destroying that gate. Hopefully that thing was not historically relevant or worth preserving.
My brother Dumah, a powerful warrior in life. He would have burned with shame to have me find him here like a stuck pig.
So the humans killed Dumah by impaling him multiple times, but impaling a vampire does not fully kill them. Their soul lingers behind in the spectral realm, so let's go ahead and shift there and see what we can find.
Come to save my soul, prodigal brother.
Not to save it, but to take it. Your only salvation is release.
This is a really fun detail that I did not know about until I was playing this remaster, that you could actually have a conversation with Dumah in the spectral realm after you find his body. Now there's no way that we can beat him in the spectral realm, so we're going to postpone this fight just long enough for us to go back into the material world. We need to be able to devour Dumah's soul in order to gain a new ability, and since we cannot beat him in the spectral realm in order to devour his soul, we're going to go back into the material world, return to the throne room, and we are going to do something very risky. We are going to start pulling pikes out of his body so that he is no longer impaled, and his soul can return to his body, fully resurrecting Dumah. Only he's been in the spectral realm a long time, and just like with the wraiths who return to a vampire's body, that can give them some new spectral-like abilities whenever they come back to life. Or he's a vampire, so I guess unlife. Alright, let's see what happens.
Unbound at last. I thank you, brother.
Your thanks are premature, Dumah. I have not forgotten whose hands bore me into the abyss.
The centuries in limbo have honed my strength. Not even Kain is my equal.
Even the strongest vampire is vulnerable.
We shall test your thesis, Raziel.
My bloodthirst has been superseded by an even darker hunger. I will consume your soul before this day is done.
Okay, the gimmick for Dumah is that he's a very mighty warrior, very strong, has lots of sheer force, so Raziel is not going to beat him one-on-one in a fight, so trying to strike him is going to be very pointless. Instead, what we have to do is trick him and kind of use the environment to beat him, just like we have with all the other bosses, really. So Dumah is going to pursue Raziel wherever he goes, as long as Raziel does not get too far away. So you still have to kind of stay close to Dumah whenever you're running away from him, just to make sure you are incentivizing him to continue the pursuit. Now occasionally he's going to punch the ground. That ground pound causes Raziel to be stunned, and you'll even begin to see some of that blue spectral energy taking over Raziel, kind of constricting him and limiting his movement. So I guess this is a way of saying that his time in the spectral realm has given him some new abilities besides just sheer force. We have to keep an eye out for that, so that's why I'm always kind of looking behind me to make sure that Dumah is still following me, and also to kind of guess when he's about to punch the ground. Although I do a terrible job of avoiding those punches in this game. Like this playthrough, I feel like I only maybe dodged it once. Not to worry though. Whenever Dumah does that ground pound, if you continue running away from him, even if he does hit the ground and stun you, he still has to close the distance between where he punched the ground and where you ended up. And that's normally enough time for you to recover from your stun and start running again before he can hit you. So Dumah is not very threatening. But even if he's not very threatening and you can keep running away from him, eventually you do need to beat him somehow. So how do we do it? Well, remember earlier whenever I said that I took the wrong direction out of the furnace room, I went through the hole that we blew in the wall when I should have went through a different way to get to the block I needed to move? Well, that might have left you wondering, well, if we weren't supposed to use the hole in the wall, when are we supposed to use the hole in the wall? Well, that time has come. We lured Dumah all the way down the hallway to the hole in the wall back into the furnace room, and I need him to stay in the middle of that room. This is the reason I prepped the gas earlier as well, so I could very quickly just run up to the lever without having to do too much preparation, pull that lever, and boom goes Dumah.
Consuming Dumah's soul empowers you to wind a constricting band of spectral energy around your enemies. This energy manifests itself in both the spectral and material realms, and in the physical world, it can be employed to manipulate otherwise immovable objects.
And after a fiery inferno engulfed his entire body, we have defeated Dumah, consumed his soul, and gained his ability, which is going to be a constriction ability. Anytime we run in circles around something, a spectral band of energy is going to go around it. This can be used in combat, although I never do so because it just does not feel practical whatsoever. Where this ability is going to come into play though is with physical objects we need to move around for puzzle solving. And if you recall earlier, I showed you a weird sundial that was in the middle of a snowy plain, and I mentioned that the sundial was going to be the key to opening up the final area of the game. Well, that constriction ability can move that sundial around, and that's going to open up the final dungeon. So I'm making my way there now, exiting the Fortress of Dumah. Which, when it comes to Dumah, I hope these centuries of waiting to be resurrected were worth it, because once he was resurrected, he was only alive again for about 3 minutes before dying one more time. And once Raziel climbs up this wall, the Elder God is going to have something to say to him, letting him know what the next objective is going to be.
In the furthermost canyon of Nosgoth's frozen wastes, the hushed silences embrace an ancient enigma. In the bowels of this labyrinth, your master awaits.
And alright, you heard the Elder God. The next objective is to face off against the person who murdered us. We are going to be finding Kain. In order to reach him, we're going to be going down this snowy path back to the sundial, but this is where I'm going to be ending this episode, so we'll be going after him in Part 5. Which, yeah, Part 5 is going to be the finale of my playthrough of Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. We only have one episode to go. Up to this point, Raziel has defeated 4 of his fellow lieutenants that he considered brothers. I already mentioned that the 5th and final one, Terrell, does not make an appearance in this game. He gets away. And eventually down the road in a future game, he ends up getting murdered by Raziel, but it's going to take a little bit of time for that to happen. Even though Terrell does not make an appearance in this game though, his clan is still around, and we are going to be seeing them in the final part of this playthrough as well, because they are a very common enemy in the final dungeon. But yeah, we have managed to kill Melchiah, Zephon, Rahab, and now in this episode, Dumah. In the final episode of this playthrough, we're going to try and add Kain to the list of enemies we have managed to get revenge against, and we will see what exactly happens from there. How does the game conclude? For now though, thank you for watching this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to check out the other things I have on the Thor's Entertainment channel. I do have all the other episodes of this playthrough available there, as well as how to find a bunch of optional items in Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. And I also have playthroughs of other games entirely, like the remakes of Resident Evil 1 and 2, and the remaster of Crash Bandicoot, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to check it out. But yeah, thanks again for checking out this episode. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, take care, and hopefully I will see you next time.